As you can see, we've got Jack on the ramp. Jack's on the ramp because I think he's a little bit poorly. So Josh was driving him to the show the other weekend up at Lavenham. Mark was following behind and Josh was nailing it up a hill for quite a long period of time, and then Mark noticed there seemed to be quite a lot of smoke coming out from underneath the engine via the engine breather. Not good. Josh backed off, they pulled over, checked oil, that was all okay, let it cool down, and on they went. No problem at all. So I'm going to take a little look and just see what's happened. What damage have we got? Don't know. First things first, let's do a compression test and see where we're at. Oh yeah, we've got a removable engine lid. That's cool. All I need to do is unplug the number plate light, undo the magic clips, and off he comes. It's a bit easier to get in there now, isn't it? There is definitely some evidence of oil sprayed around the engine bay. Not an awful lot, but a bit, which makes me think possibly a bit of heavy breathing. So I'm going to disconnect the coil first. So we've got no spark. Let's pull the plugs out and let's get this compression test done. See what we've got. Fingers crossed. That's all 4 spark plugs out. First thing I noticed, 3 plugs are beautifully dry, got a lovely colour, as they should do. Number 1 plug looks a bit oily, a bit moist, which coincides with the starting of Jack this morning. When I fired him up, normally he's super crisp on 4 cylinders straight away. He was a little bit hesitant to get that 4th cylinder into life. So I think number 1 is possibly our problem. So yeah, compression test time. I'm going to start with number 3. Because 3, 4 and 2 look dry on the spark plug. They look like they've got the correct burn going on. So we're going to start there and see what they're like to compare to our oily number 1. So number 3 first. Twiddle him in. Plug in the compression tester gauge. Put him somewhere safe, make sure he's on 0. And now I'm going to go and turn the key, get the engine to spin over and see what sort of compression we make. On a cold engine, okay, so we've got 125 psi. That's pretty good. Let's do the next one. What did we get on number 4? Yeah, 125 again. Again, cold engine. With this engine a little bit warmer, it has got quite a high compression. It's normally around about 150 psi when I've tested it before hot. So 125 cold, yeah, it's probably about right. Hopefully, number 2 should be around the 125 Mark II. Which it is. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to do number 1. Let's do number 1. Let's see what's going on. Our survey says not good, unfortunately. Wow, that is just 60 psi. So half. Well, yeah, less than half. Wow. So number 1 is our problem cylinder, which is what I thought just by looking at the spark plugs and the way he started up, but oh, okay. That's definitely engine out time and strip down, see what we've got. With the engine lid off, you can see it's a lot easier to get to everything. But the first thing I need to do is look where those carburetors are, right on the outside. So the engine won't go down with those carburetors on. So carburetors and manifolds off. And then we can pop the engine out. Right, let's get to it. As you can see, I've removed the fuel pipe, the throttle cable, the tinware around the front, both carburetors. So next, I was just about to remove all the wiring. So a little tip with the wiring, you can either take photos with your phone, which is really easy, That's the great thing about modern phones, they've got great cameras. Or really easy just to put a little bit of masking tape on and label what you've got. So I've got rev counter, coil positive, oil switch, so that's all good. I can remove that once I've undone my last couple of wires off the dynamo. Just makes life a lot easier putting it back together. Also, if it wasn't me putting it back together, it'd be a lot easier for somebody else. Anyway, let's crack on and see if we can get this out. The engine is out. It was a little bit more of a wiggle than I would have liked. Luckily I had Matt here to help me. For some reason I couldn't find the last tinware screw, which is buried here for, I don't know what's going on there. I have to have a look at that. And then I would have been able to loosen and remove the tinware this side to get this side of the manifold off, and it would have just made life a little bit easier. But anyhow, the engine is out, and let's get stripped down and see what we've got. Just trying to get our exhaust to let go so we can get the heads and the barrels off that side. So block of wood, hammer, patience, and a lot of penetrating spray. Let's get cracking, see if I can get it off. Chasing the engine around a bit on the trolley, trying to remove the exhaust, it finally let go and came off. Then I could whip the cylinder heads off and the barrels, and then check out the damage. Ooh, uh-oh. Yeah, I'll show you what happened. Check this out. There's a bit of piston missing here. That's actually burnt away. So we've got a bit there missing there. The top compression ring is actually sort of part of the piston now, is melted together, so this got rather hot indeed, and you can see the skirts picked up as well, and the barrel is toast also. So we need a complete set of barrels and pistons for this engine, and then we can get it going again. As you can see behind me, I've got the studs out, the pistons are out, I've given the block a good clean up, removed all the sealer, so that's sort of ready to build really. But you might be able to see right the way over there on the bench, I've got a brand new set of pistons and barrels. So my next job is to get the piston rings gapped up correctly, and then we can get them all fitted up. So over to the bench. Check these bad boys out, some brand new barrels and pistons. Beautiful, aren't they? Don't they look great? Oh, I love a new barrel, look at that. So there's our piston. Obviously I've got the top ring taken off because I'm gapping the top ring in our barrel. So that's our job, is to get all of these rings gapped to the barrels, and then we can get them fitted. Awesome. Piston ring gaps. How important is it? And do we really need it? Yes, super important, and of course we need it. Why do we need it? We need it because of thermal expansion. What that means is, as the engine heats up, our ring actually increases in size. And what that can do is, if I show you the piston ring, See, it's got a lovely gap here at the moment because it's not compressed in the barrel, but it's this gap I'm talking about. Now, as it heats up, that gap will become smaller and smaller due to thermal expansion and the ring getting bigger. Now, if we haven't got enough gap between those two parts of the ring, as it heats up, they can actually butt up against each other. Then that's not good. If they butt up against each other, then they can deflect and basically score the bore, cause serious problems. So we have to make sure that gap is correct. Now, how do we make sure that gap's correct? Well, we literally put it into our barrel, get it as flat as possible. I use a piston, I'll show you how to do that. And then we measure the gap with feeler blades. And that gap should be, well, actually, for this engine, because it's a fairly high compression air-cooled engine, I'm going to allow 4.5 thou per inch of bore. What that means is the size of the bore. This is an 80mm bore, so this is 3.15 inches, I believe, something like that. I have to double check when I did my sums. 80mm into inches. Anyway, you get the gist. So I times my 4.5 thou by 3.15 inches, which gives me 14 thou. So I should have a 14 thou gap on this ring when it's cold in this barrel, like so. If we haven't got that, then there's a good chance that the rings could butt each other up, and then, as I say, the ring will carry on swelling up. As you can see, we've got our barrel here. Here it is, beautiful. And we've got our piston rings here. This is the top compression ring, this is the second compression ring, and then we have an oil control ring also on the piston. And we need to gap all of these because we don't want them butting up and scratching the bore at all. First things first, let's do this top ring. So as I say, I use a piston just to square it up, but we're just going to pop it in the barrel like so. See, it's in there, look. And I'm going to use the piston, not that one. I'm going to use the piston here with no compression rings on it, it's just got oil control. And I'm going to gently shove that down until, say, that second groove lines up all the way around, make sure it's nice and even. Right, so we're super square, lovely. Now, I don't know if you guys can see that on camera. Let me try and, yeah, there you go. You see the gap, that piston ring gap there, which is here. We need to measure that gap. So I'm going to use a feeler blade to measure that, find out what that gap is, and that's the gap we need to make 14 thou. So if it's not 14 thou, we need to adjust it, and we adjust it with a file and a stone. I'll show you how to do that, like a sharpening stone, not like a stone you dig out of your garden, but a proper sharpening stone, just to take the edges off. Let's start with 10 thou, see if we can get 10 thou in there. So that's my 10 thou feeler blade. I'm going to pop it in the gap. Yeah, I can get 10 thou in there, and it's not tight, but it's not loose either. So can we get 11? Yes, I can get 11 in there, all right, okay. So let's go up to 12. Can we get a 12 thou gauge in there? Oh, now that's tight. I can feel that's good. Yeah, so that is a 12 thou gap. I don't think we get 13 in there, but we will try. 13 is probably going to be a no-go. No, not going to get a 13 in there. So that ring is gapped at 12 thou at the moment. Obviously we need to go up to 14 thou. There, so I've got to remove 2 thou overall to be able to get that 14 thou in there. Right, let's get that bit done. I've got my top piston ring. This is the one that I need to remove 2 thou from. I've got a file which we need to be really careful with because these are quite hard and brittle, and so is this, so we need to be quite gentle. And then we can clean the edges up with a sharpening stone. I'm going to use the edge of the vise as a guide to keep our edge of our piston ring straight. As you can see, as I put it over, look. So I'm going to file in line with the vise to keep that nice and straight. Last thing we want to do is start coming around here and ending up with an unsquare gap. So we want the gap nice and even when we put it back in the bore. So yeah, that should be fine. I'm going to go really, really steady with the file because if you go too fast and furious, and if the file's too coarse, it can actually chip the piston ring. So we need to be super gentle. It's a very fine file I've got, so we should be okay. Right, let's get cracking. Pop our piston ring on the vise there. As I say, using my bolt with my little bit of rubber sleeve as a guide, keeping that piston ring in line with the vise, and then very gently with a file, which again I'm keeping in line. When we're filing our piston ring, we do a very small bit at a time. You see the shiny side, that's the bit that I'm taking the material away from, as normally it would be black like the rest of the piston ring. So tiny little bit at a time, make sure we haven't got any sharp jagged edges, pop it in the bore and remeasure and see where we're at. Let's try it. I'm going to go straight for the 14th thou because I think we're pretty close. Yeah, look at that, spot on. So you can see there's our gap, that's our 14th thou gap, absolutely spot on. It's a good idea to check the piston ring gap at the top of the bore, in the middle and at the bottom of the bore, and just make sure that the barrel is absolutely square all the way down. So that's my ring gapped. As I mentioned before, it's always a good idea just to double check and take the sharp edges off the ring. So I use a sharpening stone. Yeah, I know, I couldn't find a bigger one. And all I do is gently rub that on the edge of the ring where I've obviously adjusted it. And almost like a very small chamfer that we're putting on it, but we're just taking off the sharp edges so we know that that won't actually scratch the ball when it's going up and down on the piston. So it doesn't take much, it's very like a light. If you haven't got a stone, you can use a bit of wet and dry wrapped around a screwdriver or something like that. It's just to make sure that we haven't got any nasty sharp edges. Now I've just got to do all the others. There's only 3 though, because it's only a 4-cylinder, so that's all good. Right, let's get it done. That's the piston ring's gap set on our first compression ring across all 4 cylinders. As I said, I set those to 14 thou. Next is our second compression ring, number 2 ring on the piston. Also a very important ring, so I've popped that in our barrel there. I've done a quick measure. This is at the moment 10 thou gap. So the gap we need for the second ring is actually slightly larger than the gap for the first ring. Reason being is although the top ring takes all the heat, and obviously we need to make sure we've got enough gap for that thermal expansion, we will get a little bit of blow-by in that gap. Now, the second ring, the gap needs to be slightly larger, so that alleviates that blow-by. If the gap was smaller, it could cause pressure between the two compression rings and stop the top ring working correctly. You can get ring flutter, only at high RPM. So rule of thumb is to always do that second ring slightly larger so our blow-by has an easy track to get through. So let's crack on with ring number 2 across all 4 bores and get them gapped. So again, rule of thumb for this, I'm going to go 5 thou per inch of bore for the second compression ring, which works out at roughly 16 thou. So that's what we'll do. That's our top and second piston ring gapped across all 4 bores. That's done. So lastly, we've got to look at the oil control ring. So that's the last ring on the pistons. We've got our first compression, our second compression, and then our oil control set. Now the oil control set of rings are made up of 3 components. So we've got a scraper ring on the bottom, like a gauze that fits round through the centre, and then another scraper ring that sits on top of that. So it's like a sandwich pack. Now that we can't do anything with. They're already preset from manufacture, so the gap is actually larger than we require anyway. So again, I would probably, if they were gappable, I'd be setting those somewhere around 18, 16 thou, something like that. But because they're already larger than that, we can't do anything with them. So we'll leave them as they are. We just need to make sure that that is correct. So I've popped a part of the oil control ring, which is the scraper ring, into the bore and just measured, make sure we've got a whacking great gap, which we have. So again, that's safe. So obviously the job for the oil control ring is to allow oil up into the bore and then scrape it back down, just to lubricate that the bore as the piston's going up and down. So with our gaps all set, we can now start to clean all this. Also, before we go there actually, we're just going to double check. It's always a good idea to double check that your piston rings fit into the gap nicely. Again, I've had before, but there may be a discrepancy on the piston or a little mark or something that stops the ring actually moving correctly. So what I like to do is take the piston ring the right way up. It's written top on the top, and actually put it into the groove. Make sure that it can move in that groove and there's a gap all the way around. I think our land gap between the ring and the top of the piston can be anywhere between half 1 thou to 4 thou, something like that. But as long as we've got a gap, I mean, these are manufactured for these pistons, so we should be spot on. And there's no tight spots all the way around, it feels great. So we do that for the top ring, and I'll do that for the second compression ring also. Just make sure that we can run that all the way around and we haven't got any tight spots. So we know that that's good to go. Also, while I'm on the subject of checking things, I always keep our bores, pistons and rings all in the same sequence. So I've got 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I've kept everything in order. I haven't swapped anything around. As you can see, everything is in order. So I've got piston number 1, ring set number 1, top and middle, and obviously the barrel as well. And that goes for number 2, number 3, number 4, and it's very important to keep all those in that correct sequence. Next, it's time to give everything a good clean before we reassemble. So I've got my clean solution here, lovely. It's just a drop of thinners actually. And so I'm going to wash the piston, wash the rings, and then assemble it. Right, so let's clean the piston first. Also, I've got gloves on because I'm using thinners, so if you are using any sort of solvent solution, make sure you get your gloves on. I'm going to clean exactly where the piston rings fit through the grooves all the way around. Make sure that they're clean and free of debris, and just give the skirt of the piston a wash over. These are new pistons, they are clean, but they are oiled, so they can pick up debris. So I like to degrease them, and then we can fit them up and make sure they stay clean. So that's number 1 piston, he's done. I'll pop him here. Then we're going to do the rings. So we're going to do top ring first, which is this one. Top ring first. Again, degrease it, make sure there's no debris stuck to it. You already see there's a bit of dirt in the thinner solution there. So that's our top ring. Let him dry. Do the same for the middle ring. Again, don't get these mixed up. Try and keep them in the correct order, obviously. So that's our middle ring, and that's that. That's first piston cleaned with the rings cleaned. So let's do all the others, and then we can clean the bores the same, the barrels, and then we can start fitting up. Give the barrel a quick clean. So that's all the pistons cleaned. I'm just going to clean the inside of the barrel, get rid of all the oil again, so it's not holding any debris. And when we reassemble, obviously we can re-oil. But at the moment, I want it all clean. That's one. Let's do the other 3.